Boeing spent $43 billion buying back its own stock between 2013 and 2019. In that same period, a software system on the 737 MAX was reading data from a single sensor instead of two. The fix, connecting the second sensor, would have cost a fraction of what Boeing spent on buybacks in a single quarter. They didn't make the fix. 2 planes crashed. 346 people died. Every 737 MAX on Earth was grounded. This was not a freak accident. This was not a software bug that slipped through testing. This was the final result of a 25-year project to turn the greatest engineering company in American history into a machine for returning cash to shareholders. The man who started that project said it out loud, on the record, in the Chicago Tribune. His name was Harry Stonecipher. He was the former CEO of McDonnell Douglas, a company that had already failed because of cost-cutting. Boeing hired him anyway. He became president, then CEO. In 2004, he told a reporter, "When people say I changed the culture of Boeing, that was the intent, so that it's run like a business rather than a great engineering firm." 14 years later, a plane built under that culture nosedived into the Java Sea. 5 months after that, another one nosedived into a field outside Addis Ababa. 346 people gone. The decisions that killed them weren't made in a cockpit. They were made in a boardroom. And the people who made them are still making decisions at companies you depend on right now. Chapter 1. The Engineers. For most of the 20th century, Boeing was the most respected engineering company on Earth. William Boeing founded the company in Seattle in 1916. He was a timber baron who became obsessed with flight after riding in a seaplane. He built his first airplane in a boathouse on the Duwamish River. The wings were made of spruce and linen. From that boathouse, Boeing grew into the company that built the B-17 Flying Fortress, the B-29 Superfortress, the 707 that launched the jet age, the 747 that democratized international travel, and the spacecraft that carried American astronauts. Boeing did not just build planes. Boeing built the infrastructure of modern civilization. Every time a human being steps onto a commercial aircraft anywhere on Earth, they are trusting engineering principles that Boeing pioneered. The culture that produced these machines was specific. Engineers ran the company, not marketers, not finance executives, engineers. The people who designed the planes also made the decisions about how the company operated. The CEO of Boeing for decades was an engineer who had worked on aircraft programs. The headquarters was in Seattle, the same city where the factories were. Executives walked the factory floor. They ate in the same cafeteria as the machinists. They could see the planes being assembled from their office windows. The physical proximity was not symbolic. It was structural. When the people making decisions about cost and schedule could see the product being built with their own eyes, the decisions were different. Boeing's engineers had a saying that became part of the company's identity. "We eat, breathe, and sleep airplanes." The company attracted engineers who wanted to build the best aircraft in the world. The culture self-selected for people who cared more about the product than the stock price. This culture produced the safest commercial aircraft in history. Boeing's safety record was not just good. It was the standard against which every other manufacturer was measured. Airlines bought Boeing because passengers trusted Boeing. Passengers trusted Boeing because engineers ran Boeing. The chain was unbroken for 80 years. Then Boeing acquired McDonnell Douglas, and McDonnell Douglas acquired Boeing from the inside. Chapter 2. The Merger. In 1997, Boeing merged with McDonnell Douglas in a deal valued at $13 billion. On paper, Boeing was the acquirer. In practice, McDonnell Douglas executives took control. McDonnell Douglas was a military aviation company based in St. Louis. It had once been a major commercial aircraft manufacturer. The DC-10 was its most famous product. But by the 1990s, its commercial division had withered. Airlines had stopped buying its planes. The company survived on military contracts and cost-cutting. The cultures could not have been more different. Boeing was an engineering company that happened to be a business. McDonnell Douglas was a business that happened to make airplanes. Boeing measured success by the quality of the aircraft. McDonnell Douglas measured success by the stock price. Phil Condit was Boeing's CEO at the time of the merger. Harry Stonecipher, McDonnell Douglas's CEO, became Boeing's president and chief operating officer. Within months, the cultural collision was visible on every level of the organization. Stonecipher brought what he called a passion for affordability to Boeing. The phrase became despised among Boeing's engineers. Affordability meant cutting costs. Cutting costs meant reducing engineering hours, outsourcing design work, and pressuring suppliers to deliver cheaper components. The engineers who had spent their careers building the best aircraft in the world were now being told to build the cheapest. In 2001, Condit made the decision that engineers and industry analysts point to as the moment Boeing's culture broke permanently. He moved the company's headquarters from Seattle to Chicago. Boeing had no operations in Chicago, no factories, no engineering centers, no test facilities. The move was made to gain $60 million in state and local tax incentives over 20 years. $60 million. Boeing's annual revenue at the time was approximately $58 billion. The move put 1,000 miles between the executives who made decisions and the engineers who built the planes. The CEO could no longer walk the factory floor. The CFO could no longer see an aircraft being assembled from the window. The physical connection between leadership and product, the structural feature that had kept Boeing's culture intact for 80 years, was severed. The executives were now closer to Wall Street than to the factory. The priorities shifted accordingly. Chapter 3. The stock price. After Condit resigned in 2003, over an ethics scandal unrelated to aviation, the board brought Stonecipher out of retirement to replace him. The man from McDonnell Douglas was now running Boeing. Stonecipher lasted 2 years before he too resigned over a personal relationship with a subordinate. His replacement was Jim McNerney, the first Boeing CEO who was not an engineer and had no aviation background. McNerney came from 3M. Before that, he had been at General Electric under Jack Welch. The Welch playbook was simple and public. Cut costs, outsource, reduce headcount, return cash to shareholders through dividends and stock buybacks. Measure everything by quarterly earnings. The stock price is the scorecard. Everything else is a variable to be optimized. McNerney applied this playbook to Boeing with discipline and consistency. He pushed for higher profit margins, targeting 7% after tax, a number Boeing had not hit since the 1970s. He expanded outsourcing on the 787 Dreamliner program, handing 70% of the design and manufacturing to outside suppliers. He pressured the engineering teams to deliver faster, cheaper, with fewer resources. The stock price responded. Boeing shares climbed steadily. Investors were pleased. The board was pleased. Wall Street analysts upgraded their ratings. McNerney was celebrated as a transformational CEO. The buybacks began in earnest. Boeing repurchased its own shares at an accelerating rate. Between 2013 and 2019, the company spent $43 billion buying back stock. In some years, the buyback spending exceeded 99% of operating cash flow. Nearly every dollar the company generated went back to shareholders instead of into engineering, manufacturing, or safety. $43 billion. That number needs to sit for a moment, because later in this story, a software fix that would have saved 346 lives will be measured in the low hundreds of millions. Boeing had the money, 43 times over. The money went somewhere else. Chapter 4. The 737 MAX. The decision that led directly to 346 deaths was made in 2011. And it was a financial decision, not an engineering one. Airbus had launched the A320neo, a new version of its best-selling narrow-body jet with updated, fuel-efficient engines. Airlines were placing massive orders. Boeing was losing market share. Boeing's engineers wanted to design a completely new airplane. A clean sheet design, new fuselage, new wings, new systems, built from scratch to compete with Airbus for the next 30 years. This is what Boeing had always done. The 707 was new, the 747 was new, the 777 was new. Boeing's competitive advantage was building new aircraft that were better than anything else in the sky. A new plane would cost roughly $20 billion and take 7 to 10 years to develop. The finance team proposed a different option. Take the existing 737, a design that dated back to 1967, and bolt new engines onto it. A modified 737 could be certified faster because it would be classified as a variant of an existing aircraft, not a new design. Airlines that already flew 737s wouldn't need to retrain their pilots. Faster certification, lower training costs, faster sales. The modification would cost a fraction of a new design. Boeing could keep the buybacks flowing while simultaneously competing with Airbus. The finance team won. Boeing announced the 737 MAX in August 2011. It became the fastest-selling aircraft in Boeing's history. Over 5,000 orders from more than 100 airlines worldwide. There was one engineering problem. The new engines were bigger than the old ones. The 737 sits low to the ground, a feature dating back to the 1960s when the plane was designed to service smaller airports with less ground equipment. The bigger engines didn't fit under the wings in the same position. Boeing's solution was to mount them higher and further forward. This changed the aerodynamics. At high angles of attack, when the nose points too far up, the new engine position created a pitch-up tendency that the old 737 didn't have. Left uncorrected, the plane could stall. Boeing's fix was software, a system called MCAS, the Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System. When sensors detected the nose was too high, MCAS automatically pushed it down. The system was designed to make the MAX fly like the old 737, so that pilots wouldn't notice a difference. MCAS relied on data from a single angle of attack sensor. The plane had two sensors. MCAS read one. If that sensor malfunctioned and sent bad data, telling the system the nose was too high when it wasn't, MCAS would push the nose down, repeatedly, with enough force to override the pilots. Boeing's engineers knew this was a vulnerability. A single sensor is a single point of failure. Redundancy, using two sensors so that one can catch the other's error, is a fundamental principle of aviation safety. Boeing chose the single sensor design because connecting both sensors would require additional testing, additional certification, additional cost, and additional time. It would slow down the schedule. The schedule was the priority. An indicator light that would have warned pilots when the two sensors disagreed was available, as an optional upgrade. Airlines could pay extra for it. Neither Lion Air nor Ethiopian Airlines purchased it. MCAS was not mentioned in the pilot training manual. Pilots converting from older 737 models to the MAX were not told the system existed. Boeing had argued to the FAA that MCAS operated in the background and did not require pilot awareness. The FAA agreed. Pilots flew the 737 MAX without knowing that a software system they'd never heard of could push the nose of the plane toward the ground based on data from a single sensor. Chapter 5. The Crashes. On October 29, 2018, Lion Air Flight 610 departed Jakarta, Indonesia. 12 minutes after takeoff, the plane crashed into the Java Sea. All 189 passengers and crew were killed. The flight data recorder showed that MCAS had activated 26 times in 10 minutes. A faulty angle of attack sensor had sent incorrect data. MCAS read that data from the single sensor and repeatedly forced the nose down. The pilots fought the system. The system won. Boeing issued a bulletin to airlines after the crash. The bulletin reminded pilots of existing procedures for handling a runaway stabilizer. The same procedures that had existed for decades on earlier 737 models. Boeing did not ground the fleet. Boeing did not mandate simulator training. Boeing CEO Dennis Muilenburg went on television and said the 737 MAX was safe. 5 months later, on March 10, 2019, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 departed Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. 6 minutes after takeoff, the plane crashed into a field. All 157 passengers and crew were killed. The cause was identical. A faulty angle of attack sensor. MCAS reading from a single source. The system pushing the nose down. The pilots followed Boeing's recommended procedure. They turned off the electric trim system to disable MCAS. It didn't work. The aerodynamic forces were too strong to overcome manually at the speed they were traveling. They turned the electric trim back on. MCAS reactivated and pushed the nose down for the last time. 346 people. 2 crashes, 5 months apart, the same cause. A software system that Boeing chose not to make redundant, chose not to disclose to pilots, and chose not to fix after the first crash killed 189 people. The 737 MAX was grounded worldwide on March 13, 2019, 3 days after the Ethiopian Airlines crash. 387 aircraft, 59 airlines, 8,600 flights per week, grounded for nearly 2 years. Chapter 6. The Math. Here is the math that should keep every Boeing executive awake at night. $43 billion on stock buybacks between 2013 and 2019. The company bought back a quarter of its own outstanding shares. The money went to shareholders. It did not go into engineering. It did not go into safety systems. It did not go into designing a new airplane. The cost of connecting MCAS to both angle of attack sensors, the redundancy that would have prevented both crashes, was trivial relative to Boeing's revenues. The cost of making the disagree light standard rather than optional was trivial. The cost of including MCAS in the pilot training manual was trivial. The cost of designing a new airplane to replace the 737, a genuine clean sheet design that wouldn't need MCAS at all, was estimated at $20 billion. Boeing spent more than twice that on buybacks in 6 years. Boeing had the money to build the safest airplane in the world. Boeing chose to give that money to shareholders instead. The result was 346 deaths, a 2-year grounding, criminal charges, a $2.5 billion settlement with the Department of Justice, an estimated $20 billion in total costs from the crisis, and the destruction of a safety reputation that had taken 80 years to build. The decisions made in the name of shareholder value cost shareholders $87 billion in lost market value between 2018 and 2022. The strategy destroyed the very value it was supposed to create. Chapter 7. The Door. 5 years after the grounding, the culture still hadn't changed. On January 5th, 2024, Alaska Airlines Flight 1282 departed Portland, Oregon on a 737 MAX 9. At approximately 16,000 feet, a door plug, a sealed panel that occupies the space where an emergency exit would be on higher capacity configurations, blew off the fuselage. The cabin depressurized instantly. Oxygen masks dropped. Passengers' phones and clothing were sucked out of the aircraft. A child's shirt was later found in a backyard in Portland. The plane made an emergency landing. No one died, a matter of altitude and luck. The investigation found that the door plug had been delivered to Boeing's customer, Alaska Airlines, with 4 critical retaining bolts missing. Not loose, not improperly installed. Missing. The plane was delivered to a commercial airline with structural bolts absent from the airframe. This was not a software error. This was not a design flaw. This was a manufacturing failure so basic that it defied explanation. 4 bolts. The kind of mistake that a culture of engineering excellence, the culture that Boeing had for 80 years, would have caught at 17 different checkpoints before the plane ever left the factory. The culture that caught those mistakes had been systematically dismantled. The headquarters was 1,000 miles from the factory. The engineers who would have walked the line had been laid off or demoralized. The incentive structure rewarded delivery speed, not inspection thoroughness. The system was optimized for the stock price, not the product. 4 boats, 346 lives, 43 billion in buybacks. One quote from 2004, "Run like a business rather than a great engineering firm." Chapter 8. The Chain. William Boeing built planes in a boathouse. His engineers ate lunch with the machinists. The CEO could see the factory from his desk. The executives flew on the planes they built. The chain between the people who made decisions and the people affected by those decisions was short, direct, and unbroken. Harry Stonecipher broke that chain. He brought the McDonnell Douglas culture of cost-cutting and shareholder primacy into a company that had survived for 80 years by doing the opposite. Phil Condit moved the headquarters 1,000 miles from the factory. Jim McNerney applied the Jack Welch playbook and launched the buyback machine. Dennis Muhlenberg kept the machine running while 2 planes fell out of the sky. Each executive made decisions that were rational within the framework they operated in. The framework said, the stock price is the scorecard. Costs are variables to be reduced. Engineers are overhead. Safety is a regulatory requirement to be met at minimum cost. Quarterly earnings determine executive compensation. The framework was not wrong in the abstract. It is the standard operating model of American corporate governance. It works for companies that make consumer products, financial services, software. It works when the cost of failure is a product recall or a quarterly miss. It does not work when the cost of failure is 346 human beings falling out of the sky. Boeing is not a consumer products company. Boeing builds machines that carry human lives at 500 miles per hour, 35,000 feet above the ground. The margin for error is not a percentage point on a quarterly report. The margin for error is a human life. And the framework that Stonecipher and Condit and McNerney and Muhlenberg imposed on Boeing did not account for that. The engineers accounted for it. The engineers always accounted for it. That was the culture. That was the point. And that is what was destroyed. In 2004, Harry Stonecipher told the Chicago Tribune that he had changed Boeing's culture on purpose. He wanted it run like a business, not a great engineering firm. He said this publicly. He was proud of it. 14 years later, a plane designed under that culture crashed in the Java Sea and killed 189 people. 5 months after that, another one crashed outside Addis Ababa and killed 157 more. 5 years after that, a door blew off a plane because 4 boats were missing. Boeing spent $43 billion on stock buybacks in 6 years. The software fix that would have prevented both crashes cost a fraction of what Boeing spent on buybacks in a single quarter. The engineers who built the 747 and the 777 and the spacecraft that carried astronauts to the moon, those engineers were gone, retired, laid off, pushed out, replaced by a management culture that measured everything by the stock price and measured nothing by the product. 346 people are dead. Their families will never recover. The planes they were on were designed by engineers and built by machinists who were overruled by accountants who answered to shareholders who never set foot in a factory. They stopped running Boeing like a great engineering firm. They started running it like a business. 346 people paid the difference.